Hey guys, welcome back to the Yes Means Yes podcast. This week we're going to be talking about mental health and sexual assault. We have on two guests this week, Kylie Lambourne and Miranda Hosbein, as well as my coworker Amanda. So just to start off, my name is Faith Yomchev. I'm victim advocate, outreach coordinator, and prevention educator with rape counselors. And Amanda is a victim advocate and outreach specialist. So I'm going to go ahead and let Kylie and Miranda introduce themselves and talk about kind of their roles in the mental health community and what they do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kylie, and I actually have a private practice located here in downtown Auburn called Frontline Therapy. I specialize in working with veterans and first responders and any other form of trauma you may have experienced. I have experienced RCEA for them, and I used to work with Miranda shortly.
Hey guys, my name is Miranda. As she said, I work for the state here in South Carolina. I work in two different high schools here, mostly with teenagers of all four grades and their parents and families and caregivers. I do have some experience working with younger kids and middle schoolers and with some adults too, but right now my primary focus is the teenagers.
Great. I love teenagers, so I'm going to have so many questions for you. So how long have you guys been practicing?
I've been practicing 2000 so I guess the last 5 years.
Okay.
Me too, actually. We have been practicing since 2015. That's how long we've known each other for the most part. So we have both been in some different roles, but yeah, 5 years now.
Okay, so you've been like for a good amount of time. Have you guys, as you've gone through like the past 5 years, have you seen any like trends in mental health, or like something that you're noticing like more of, less of? I don't know.
I think trend-wise, something that has really stood out to me over the last few years is the difficulty of accessing appropriate care and having that availability, whether it be through insurance or even having the resources of local clinics or hotlines, whatever community you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
I've moved around a lot the last 5 years, and that's been a constant problem, most definitely on the eastern South.
Absolutely. That, and I think we've also seen in terms of what we treat, I think there's been a pretty big uprise of trauma in general. I don't know. I think some of that's part of gaining awareness. So we see different diagnostic trends and things like that as people start to learn more about different things. It happened with ADHD. It happened with anxiety. I think right now trauma is definitely in the spotlight. I also think more trauma is happening. And so that's been a huge focus. I know not just for me, but for I think all of us, especially given our work that we do.
Mm-hmm. So in your work, have you guys worked with victims of sexual violence in any capacity?
So my experience working with victims of sexual assault has lasted over the last couple of years. Recently, I was working with RCEA, like I mentioned, on the hotline, answering crisis calls, going to the hospital with victims, and working one-on-one with individuals in local high schools here in Auburn. Now that I'm no longer interning with RCEA, I do see victims of sexual assault in my private practice, and I currently have 3 individuals I'm working with. We're working on finding healing, working on building some coping skills, and just processing the experience so that they can move forward and live the life that they want to despite the experiences that they've had.
Good. Miranda, what has your experience been with victims? Have you worked with any victims of sexual violence assault, especially like working with high schoolers and stuff?
Absolutely. I've worked a lot with like teen dating violence these last couple of years working in the school system. I've found that a majority of the cases that I work with are teens that have never disclosed it before. So we build our therapeutic relationship. They're very anxious about something, or their parents say they're acting more depressed and they're not sure why. And then as the teens get to know me a little bit better, that's when something comes out either about sexual abuse when they were younger or teen dating violence, or even sometimes it's that their friends went through something and they're friends with both people involved in that situation where there was teen dating violence. And so that's a lot of what we talk about. I would say a vast majority of my cases that have come to me have dealt with it in one way or another. Either they know somebody or they've been through it themselves or their parents have been through it. And sometimes too, we even have some intergenerational things where a grandma went through it, a mom went through it, and the teen is with me going through it too.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I kind of sadly just looking at the statistics and especially in that age group that is just so vulnerable to sexual assault, it definitely makes sense that they either have been a victim or they know of the victim, like their friends and stuff. And I think as kind of a society, we don't like they're secondary victims, like to their friends. So I think that's something we overlook and we don't talk about. But I think it's great that you've been able to build these relationships with them to where they feel like they could talk to you about that. That's amazing. So when in your experience with dealing with victims or survivors of sexual assault, what kind of effect have you seen this have on their mental health?
Well, I think for me, I think sexual trauma is different because there are some traumas that impact how you view the world, and there are some traumas that impact how you view yourself. And sexual trauma seems to hit especially hard because it changes how you view both. That's what I've noticed working with the teens and parents that I've worked with.
With sexual assault, I've noticed, like Miranda said, it hits multiple different aspects of the person. So there's the emotional piece where the victim might be dealing with guilt, feelings of shame, distrust, and vulnerability. They might even isolate emotionally or shut down completely. Then they also have the psychological symptoms that they experience, whether that be difficulty concentrating, depression, PTSD. They have nightmares, night terrors, and flashbacks. And then they also experience the physical piece where they might have to have those living reminders for a short period of time of those physical injuries that come with sexual abuse. They might have bruising, they might have internal injuries, those kinds of things. So, unlike some other traumas, sexual abuse hits a victim in all different areas of their life and impacts them in multiple different ways.
Thank you. So I know that in society we kind of have this stigma on mental health. It's getting better. I've noticed in the past like several years, probably since y'all kind of started practicing, but it's still not there. Like there's still a stigma associated with it. And I definitely still think that there's a huge stigma associated with sexual assault, victim blaming, rape culture, all of that. So do you think in your experience, it makes it doubly hard for someone who's been assaulted and experiences mental illness?
I think society definitely plays a piece in whether or not victims speak out. There's this fear of being judged or not believed. There's been a lot of news in the media of victims being blamed or being said that they asked for it. And so that does make victims shy away from wanting to speak about their experiences. Or maybe they've even already reached out to a family member or a friend or someone else and they didn't react positively to it, or they told them that they didn't believe them or that they were wrong about what happened. So now they shut down even more and don't reach out again because they've had a negative experience trying to share what happened.
I agree with that a lot too. I've noticed that it seems like as a society, we're a little bit polarized. Like you kind of come down on one side or the other with mental health, especially when it involves some kind of sexual trauma, sexual assault, things like that. In the high school system, that's really apparent. I know bullying is kind of an issue, social dynamics are an issue anyway, and I feel like that is so highlighted talking to not just girls, but the guys in school too that have dealt with sexual assault where they're scared to tell somebody, like Kylie was saying, or they told someone and they're getting blamed for it or shamed for it. And then we have other people that almost shame someone for not sharing their story. So if they're feeling scared, there's a piece, it's very delicate social relationships, I think, to try to figure out how to share your story and what parts of your story to share and whether or not to report it and encouraging somebody to report it without shaming them for not telling somebody yet and things like that. And I think too, there are a lot of support people in the school system, in society, in different nonprofits. I mean, you guys know that. And I think the trainings have evolved. So we see people reacting differently in support roles too, which I think is kind of an interesting dynamic there.
I,
Hey, Miranda, I have a question. So, in the school system, do you think, or have you had any experience with, just say, someone was on a team, like a football team or a baseball team, and there was some kind of someone accusing them of anything? Do you think that or have you seen that they were treated differently by than someone that wasn't in? Like, does that make sense? What I'm saying?
It's cutting out a little bit. What I caught was asking if somebody's like part of a team and they're being accused, if they're being treated differently, or if they have like a pre-existing social dynamic like that. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Okay, it was kind of cutting in and out, so I just want to make sure.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I have a feeling there's a lot going on in that regard that I'm not seeing. I think, like Kylie was talking about, the access to mental health care is also apparent in the school system. I mean, we try to get there, and we try to get all these teenagers involved, and the reality is they could probably all talk to a therapist. And so in my experience, and I think this could be different anywhere, I notice a lot more attention being put onto the people that are reporting something. So they're getting a lot of negative attention. They're getting a lot of like ostracizing. People say they don't want to deal with their drama, so they drop them as friends and things like that. So they pull away almost in support of defending somebody else that they're like, well, they would never do that. They're my friend. That's the captain of the football team. They're on the baseball team. They're such an upstanding student. So I feel like when they have that pre-established social group, it's almost a protective factor no matter what side they're on, whether they're being reported against or they're doing the reporting. But I think that's a really interesting question.
And I just wanted to add to this piece as well that goes into whether or not victims do report, I think, is the issue of consent, knowing what it is. I know a lot of the times in high school we get sex education classes, but it doesn't always cover the extent of what consent looks like, what it can be, and what it actually means between consenting partners. And then as you go into college, it gets more confusing if you add in alcohol and other social pressures. So I think that piece really plays into it as well when you're thinking about, okay, well, is someone going to judge me because I was drunk that night? Or because I didn't say no verbally, now everyone's going to think that I'm just trying to blame the person that hurt me, So I think consent is also a huge piece.
Yeah. Y'all know I loved consent and talking about consent. I'm a huge advocate for consent. So I definitely think that's so important, especially in states like Alabama where it's abstinence-based sex ed, if any sex ed at all. So yeah, that's a really good point, especially dealing with high schoolers. So, go ahead, Amanda. Sorry.
I also think that along with consent, that like it also the age factor in it also needs to be talked about, because I think when you're dealing with the law, that the age matters. And so I think it's very important that while we do educate about consent, I think the age part of it also needs to be talked about and discussed, especially with high schoolers, because you may have someone that's 14, but they are almost 16. That makes a big difference. It may not, if they were younger or older, it changes, but I think that's a big part of it, is that needs to be discussed too, because I think they don't understand with the age factor in it, along with the consent.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Faith.
Oh, no, I was literally just saying, yeah. Go ahead.
I think some of the trends that I notice here too are that there's a lot more age blending in dating relationships here, whether they're sexual or not. So with high schoolers especially, they can go either direction. So I talk to high schoolers about dating middle schoolers and what that means. And like if I'm a freshman dating an 8th grader, but I'm hanging out with seniors that are having sex, what am I doing? And I've worked with girls and guys that feel like they need to be having sex to be mature enough to be with their dating partner. And there are high schoolers that date young adults out in the community or other adults, which I think all of us could kind of agree is something worth talking about with anybody that's dealing with it.
Yes, definitely. And I just want to point out, I think it's really cool that high schoolers are like confiding this much to you. Kudos for you for making them feel that comfortable, because knowing the high schoolers at my school, I don't think they would have told our counselors anything. So that's really cool. And that's great that you're actually building relationships with them, because I know when I was in high school too, the counselors were just our college helpers. They just helped us write our college things and make sure that we applied. And that was it. That was like the only time I saw them. So I think that's great. And I think that having that in systems such as schools is so important, especially like looking at mental health, because oftentimes you see in high schoolers, they don't realize that what happened to them was sexual assault. sometimes it takes talking to someone older or even just saying it out loud for them to be like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like that's something that I wanted to do. So I think, yeah, that's so great. Okay, so I know that Kylie's kind of talked about how she's worked with veterans and first responders, but like lots of different other kinds of trauma. But in comparison to like that and victims that you've worked with of sexual assault, sexual violence, what kind of different instances of mental health like issues or illnesses do they have? Is there a difference? Do you kind of like see reoccurring themes like based on those two groups or just other groups outside of the sexual violence victims you work with?
So, I first will address kind of if victims of sexual assault, they tend to also be more at high risk for other mental health issues such as PTSD, depression, eating disorders, substance abuse use, and those can lead to other behavioral and emotional issues as well. I think if you already have a mental health disorder and then you experience sexual assault, it also heightens and intensifies the symptoms you maybe already had from the previous diagnosis that you were dealing with already. So I think they're very intertwined, they're very connected, and they bring out the other pieces in one another. So whether or not you are a first responder or a veteran or a high schooler or just your average person, if you already have a mental illness and then experience sexual assault, you're going to have all of those things play into one another and possibly increase your symptoms or impact the way that you're able to process it and then heal from it. I do think you're more at risk depending on your job sometimes because you might have repetitive triggers for your sexual assault, especially like with women in the military. They are constantly having to possibly go up against their perpetrator because if they were to share that someone maybe higher ranking than them was the perpetrator, they're not often believed or they get kicked out of the military. So they often don't say anything and then they're constantly reminded of the power and authority that that person has over them every time they see them. So I think, all of it just kind of plays into one another, but there are ways that sexual assault can create other mental health disorders as you continue to heal from it. If that made it, I don't know if it did.
No, it did. It really did. Yeah, that was a great answer.
Yeah, I thought it really did too. And I really agree with what Kylie was saying too. I think that was spot on. I think when you ask about some of the differences we might see, like if somebody's dealing with anxiety versus like PTSD from trauma, some of the things we might see is with sexual assault would be something more acute. Like it comes on fast and it comes on hard because it's pulling at different parts of people. Kylie, correct me if you feel like there's a better answer here, but I feel in our experiences, we've seen that there's a big identity piece and it pulls at that in such different directions. Whereas we're kind of primed to understand an identity of depression or understand an identity of anxiety. At least in the young adults that I've worked with and the teens I've worked with, they really embody those and really claim those, which is positive that they have the awareness and can also be difficult because they're getting pulled into it pretty hard. And with sexual assault, that turns into something traumatic for somebody, whether it's a teen or an adult or a child. It seems like there's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty, not only what's happening on the outside with the feedback we get from other people, but also what's happening on the inside and trying to understand it. And that seems to impact it pretty strongly, at least in my experience.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Go ahead. Sorry, Kylie.
With that identity piece, especially if we were to focus on women specifically, 1 in 6 women experience attempted rape or rape in their lifetime, and that number increases if you're on a college campus to 1 in 4. And then you have 1 in 33 men also experiencing attempted rape or completed rape in their lifetime. So when you have those high numbers, women who are experiencing sexual assault, they're going to be impacted by what it means now to be a woman. And a lot of the people that I've seen when we come into my office, they say things like, I'm dirty now, I'm disgusting, I'm shameful, I was weak. And they really take on those identities of not being womanly enough anymore, or not feeling like they're pure enough now for a future relationship. So I think it really does shape the identity a lot. and bring a lot of confusion and lots of questions into place for individuals who do experience sexual assault, just like Miranda was saying.
So you are kind of seeing it as being a more like personal thing, like they're like, as opposed to someone who would experience something, they would be able to more easily see it as happening outside of them. But obviously, this is more personal.
Well, with sexual assault, it's a physical invasion. It's a violation of your own right to choose what's going on in a way that leaves not just physical scars, but emotional scars. So I'm not trying to lesser any other trauma by any means, but it is a trauma that impacts every piece of you. And because it is that physical invasion, it's just a little bit more different than maybe witnessing something else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's like an attack on your home that you cannot leave. It is you instead of, yeah. Totally. I know that the FBI ranks sexual assault as the second most violent crime to murder. And I feel like we need to talk about that more. We need to, like, people just want to sweep this one under the rug, but it is so personal and it is so damaging. Like, just in my work with rape counselors, I've seen how devastating the trauma is from a sexual assault. Like, honestly, more so than I've seen from so many other like traumas that have happened. It's just so personal and so like affects their identity, like you guys have said.
Well, when you think
Sorry.
too, most perpetrators are actually people that know the victim. So it's on more of a personal level because it's somebody that they wanted to trust or they were supposed to trust, and now that person has violated that as well. So it just has so many layers that make it just a different type of trauma altogether.
And
I love that point that you just made, Kylie, about it having so many different layers. This question is making me think about how people give feedback on different traumas and how we perceive our own traumas and other people's traumas too. Like, we just had a tornado come through here at Easter and it wiped out some homes, which is a trauma for people. It's a trauma for families. And nobody's giving anybody any kind of negative feedback for having feelings about that. Nobody's saying you're wrong for being sad that your house got torn up, or it's your fault that the tornado took out your house and your family doesn't have somewhere to live. Whereas, like, when people deal with sexual assault, no matter where or what gender, there's feedback about why it happened, how they're dealing with it. You know, we see some people trying to embrace their sexuality, which results in more sexual behaviors, and then everybody's got feedback about that too, whether it's parents, friends, partners, whoever that might be. And it shows up on every level, just like you were saying, Kylie, at all those different layers. And I think that's part of why it's such a strong, impactful experience too.
And I think too, like, even it's something that more likely they're going to think about maybe even more often, because like even a simple task of taking a bath is going to remind you of that, because you're going to feel dirty and just scrubbing away, trying to scrub all of that, you know, pain and just the feeling that you have. So just doing simple tasks like taking a bath, which we all have to do, is something that can be brought to them and make them think more of it.
Yeah. Well, and as humans, I think we crave physical intimacy. That's a part of our nature, and that physical intimacy was used as a weapon against them. So it makes it even more difficult for them to like receive that in consensual partners. So when you guys work with victims, do you, or even just like individuals who come in, are there indicators that you look for that would maybe help you figure out if they had been a victim of sexual abuse or sexual assault? Like, are there things you look for, like certain signs, or is it just you kind of have to wait until they like spell it out?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, doing an initial assessment or an intake appointment with someone, you're gathering a lot of history and information about them. And some of the behaviors that they might list can point to sexual abuse. So I always think of, like, you know, wetting the bed, difficulty concentrating, maybe not meeting certain milestones on time, over sexualized behaviors, being sexually active at a very young age, or being pregnant before the age of 14 is also a really big indicator. And then their views on safety and their social circle can also tell you a lot too. Like, if they have issues of trust, things like that, then it kind of just gives me like a little, hey, pay attention to this. You might want to see what is underneath all of this and see if it might be a form of abuse that has caused some of these automatic negative thoughts that they're having or some of these behaviors that they're expressing that are causing them distress. And I know Ryan has a lot of for this, so I'm sure she's got a whole list for us.
Well, and I think there's a difference too. I think with any trauma, we look for changes in behavior. So like Kylie was saying, we might see increased depressive symptoms, a change in energy, a change in eating, weight gain, like a change in activities. Like, am I playing my sport? Am I dropping out of my sport? Am I trying to express myself differently? Am I talking to different people? I think Kylie was also right when she said that it's a little bit of both in terms of what we try to flush out versus what they share with us or what we might just see. I rely a lot when I practice, and I think Kylie does too, on nonverbals, body language, and things like that. So if I work with somebody and they're showing really open body language and maybe 6 weeks in they're not and they're really closed off, that would be something maybe had changed, right? Whether it's a trauma, a sexual assault. We might also see things where they, like Kylie was saying, have different beliefs about the world. So I've worked in both instances where the teens I'm working with have either had prior abuse, in which case they already have some beliefs, and the way that they talk about it just kind of gives you a gut feeling of like, oh, I want to ask you more about this. Or Kylie did a great job listing some of the behaviors that we might look for in kids and teenagers, where if they are showing different signs, such as the ones you listed, Kylie, we definitely want to ask more questions about that. I know myself, I try to be pretty indirect. So we talk about relationships, we talk about how we relate to people, how we know people are safe, how we know we can trust people. And there seems to be a trend of either with the teens being super cavalier, like, I don't care, it doesn't matter, I trust whoever, I talk to whoever I want. Like, they don't have that stranger danger, or it's the opposite a lot of the time where or they're anxious about socializing with new people or other people. And sometimes too, I've noticed the teens will say things like they know what they've been through, but they start saying, I don't know why I feel this way, or it just changed all of a sudden, or I just don't like that anymore. Or we watch them for physical signs too. Kylie mentioned earlier looking for bruises. I've worked with teens that have bruising on their neck. That's definitely not a hickey, and it's, or like on their wrists or their arms, like places that you wouldn't normally, like if you're clumsy, bump into something. I'm a very clumsy human and I do bump into doorknobs a lot, but it's not on my upper arm. Like, I'm too tall for that. And it's not on my neck or my forehead or like the back of my shoulders or places that people might get grabbed, whether they're male or female. So we see that a lot. I also look for with my teens if people are wearing different clothes. Like, it might not change their style or their sexual representation, but if I have a teen that is in t-shirts when it's hot and then is all of a sudden in sweatshirts, I'm wondering about self-harm and things like that, but I'm also wondering what else they're covering up. And once we have that relationship, I usually tend to poke at them a little bit to see what they are willing to talk about.
I think the important piece as like a mental health provider, when I'm working with someone that I'm suspecting might be experiencing or have experienced sexual abuse, is building that relationship with them and making sure that they feel comfortable and safe with me so that I can, like Miranda said, poke around it, ask more direct questions. And eventually I am a very direct therapist. So once I feel like I've had enough possible evidence that points in that direction, I will directly ask. I want them to feel like I can handle what they have to say, and I don't want them to feel like I'm trying to shield away from it. I do ask if the language I'm using is okay. So a lot of my sexual abuse victims, when we do have that conversation, it's, have you experienced unwanted sexual touching before? Or I'll say, have you been sexually assaulted? And they'll look at me, and if they're not ready to communicate that, then I'll change the wording, or I'll ask them, do you want to call it an incident? Do you want to call it sexual abuse? What are you comfortable calling it for now? And I allow them to change that language while we're exploring it to really find out what has happened. But if the other like piece of that is, if they're not able to label it or call it something like that, my job is to help them decrease that avoidance around it and acknowledge that, their sexual assault, it wasn't a choice. It was something that happened to them. It was their power and control was taken away. And now they can take some of that power back by not letting, that label of it take away who they are. It doesn't have to be part of their identity or all that they are now moving forward. So I think as a therapist, when we're trying to figure out whether sexual assault is happening or not, the language we use and the relationship we have with them is really important. And you just have like this feeling of when it's kind of like time to shoot your shot and see if they're going to really communicate with you. I wish I could explain that better, but there's really just like this feeling of, okay, this is it. And I need to be, open and gentle and give them a chance to share their story. I don't know if you agree with that or not, Miranda, but I feel like there really is just a moment of, okay.
Yeah, and I do agree with that. I think a big part of it is our willingness to approach it shows them that it's safe to talk about it in that space. And that's really important, not only as a mental health provider, but as any adult in the community that's interacting with other adults or people younger than them. I think there's an opportunity to address sexual assault and sexual trauma in ways that might not be the same. It might be really hard for a daycare provider to talk about depression if they don't have training. And a daycare provider can still see somebody itching a lot or asking questions about their body parts or trying to touch other kids. And we see that like when teenagers or adults even go to like their primary care doctors, that type of conversation that shows them it's okay to talk about it can happen in those places too. And I think as much as there is a stigma, there's also a big opportunity for this to be something that could be talked about in a safe way with people. Obviously, we don't want a doctor, or a daycare provider, a teacher feeling like they need to do therapy by any means. And as someone that has been in both roles in different jobs, there's so many signs out there that we can pick up on to help somebody that's dealt with it get the help that they might need.
And I think a really great resource for people if they are looking for more information on what those signs can look like should either call y'all or look at RAIN's website or even their local Department of Social Services. They have a whole pamphlet on what to look at for adults that might be experiencing abuse and children and teens. So if you wanted like a straight printout or like something of an actual list for those of us that like to have lists, I would check out those resources.
Yes. And we actually do on RCEA's outreach channel, we have a video that talks about grooming and child sexual abuse too. So that kind of goes over a lot of the signs as well for that like particular population. But yeah, I really like the point you were making about making everyone else in the community aware, because it really is on all of us. If it's especially children, especially minors, it's really our responsibility as people older than them to make sure that they're okay. Because they probably, if they're experiencing this, they probably are having people in their lives who aren't making sure they're okay. So that's something Amanda and I are kind of working really closely with now, just going out and talking to community members. We're trying to talk to daycares. We're trying to talk to OBGYNs. We have a meeting with a doula today. Like, I just want people to know the signs and just the resources that are available. So even if that person doesn't want to discuss then, they can come talk to us. They can come talk to providers like you guys, just making sure that everyone is aware, because it can so easily fall through the cracks, just like so many other issues with mental health and everything. But so you guys really have kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you differ in your treatment with sexual assault victims compared to like other clients you may have?
Well, for me, sexual assault victims and their treatment is a lot more vulnerable sometimes. So the tone of voice, the nonverbal cues, making sure my space is laid out in a way that they can have access to an exit, and they feel safe in that space is something I pay attention to. I am a certified trauma provider, so I also stick to those forms of treatment that I have been specialized and trained in. So I use something called cognitive processing therapy, which has been evidence-based and actually helps individuals who have experienced sexual trauma heal from issues like PTSD or any negative thoughts they've experienced due to the trauma in about 12 to 15 sessions. Or I utilize something called EMDR, which is just another way of reprocessing memories and thoughts and behaviors that went into the trauma experience. But when I meet with an individual, my main focus is allowing them to have the control and power of their therapeutic experience, because they got that taken away from them. So I let them make the choices of what they want to work on next. I let them decide which form of treatment works better for them. I'm not trying to fit them into my molding of what I think is going to work. I'm giving them their options and letting them choose.
Miranda?
I like what you touched on about kind of giving them a sense of control, making sure the space that you're in feels safe and feels comfortable and available to them so that they can kind of control what's happening in that session and what treatment does look like. With high schoolers, I've noticed that I do a lot of experiential things. So we do use things like cognitive processing therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, lots of very specific evidence-based treatments. And on the road to getting them to buy into some of those treatments, I find that I do a lot of movement things with them. So we'll walk the track at school. I got permission with one to use a medicine ball because feeling emotions didn't feel safe because they felt angry about their rape. And so they needed to feel anger and feel safe. So we found safe ways to process anger. Trauma, among many other things, it can be stored in your body. And so moving your body and finding ways to express yourself, whether it's painting, moving, running, slamming a medicine ball, jumping rope, doing yoga, whatever it is, there's a process of reclaiming your body as your own. And so if I have kids that don't want to talk to me about it and they refuse, I will call them out on avoiding, and we work on not avoiding. But at first, to make sure they feel safe, we work on kind of reclaiming that sense of self as well.
So, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but do you guys think that it's important for victims of sexual assault, sexual abuse, any sort of sexual violence to seek treatment for mental health, to seek therapy?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely think it's beneficial. I think it needs to be done on their own time and when they're ready. But I would encourage them to seek out help, especially if what they're experiencing is impacting, their ability to function or do things that they normally would, or if they're just feeling a little lost and different. But mental health is something that's really important, and there's definitely people here to help you with that.
Well, and along those same lines, too, I think mental health is absolutely a great road to healing. And for those that aren't ready to approach a therapist or go seek mental health and feel safe with is important. Whether it's calling a rape crisis line or connecting with a teacher or a best friend or a parent or whoever that might be, just finding that space to feel safe again. But of course, I'm biased toward mental health.
I was like, I'm going to ask this, but I know every single person here. So like, duh. I'm one of those people, I'm like, everyone should see a therapist. Everyone should be in therapy throughout their life. That's just like mine. But yeah, I like that. I definitely think that was a good point, Kylie, kind of like making sure that they do it in their own time and when they feel comfortable. Because again, they've had that control taken. So giving that back to them and letting them make their own decisions. So my final question is, do you guys have any messages that you would want survivors to know or to have? Anything you want to say to them?
I guess my final message would be for anyone who's experienced any kind of sexual trauma. Sexual violence is never the victim's fault. There are people out there that are going to believe you and want to be with you as you go through your journey and help you find healing and justice. If you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out to those of us that are available. And if you're not ready, contact RCEA because they've got great services to help you out and provide support.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your point about how there's always somebody out there that wants to be part of your story and be there to support you is really important. I think to add to that too, sexual assault or rape or sexual violence or sexual trauma, it doesn't have to be your forever story. It can be a chapter in your life. And that's not something that has to move forward with you in that same way for the rest of your life. And I think that's an important piece too, is that healing can happen.
All right. Well, that's really all I have for you guys. Do you have any other comments or things you want to say? No? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Kylie, do you want to plug your therapy practice for anyone who might be in the Auburn area?
Sure. So I am located downtown Auburn on North College Street, right across from the depot, if you're familiar with the area. My phone number is 334-424-1085. And I'm located on the second floor in Suite E. And if you have any questions about anything that we shared today, or if any questions about any mental health issues, or want to talk to someone about any of your experiences, I do offer free phone consultations. You can also email me at Kylie, Kylie, at frontlinetherapyauburn.com. And I'll get back to you, and we can have an open and honest discussion about anything that you're wanting to bring to the table about mental health and maybe your own experiences.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again so much for joining us today. I hope that this was beneficial for whoever listened and to understand that they are not alone in mental health or sexual assault or trauma. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you.